Welcome to the Greenfox Air Quality Podcast. I'm your host, Avery, and today we have three experts who often collaborate in the field. We have Brett Brunsvold, president of Greenfox Air Quality, and also a certified environmental inspector. Then we have Brad Fishbein. He is the vice president of Greenfox and an experienced mold assessor with over 15 years of experience in mold assessment. And lastly, we have Tim Lyons, the founder of Paws on Mold and handler of Zuko, a trained mold detection dog. Today we're talking about how traditional air quality professionals and canine mold detection can work together. What are the pros and cons of this kind of detection, and what's going on in this particular line of work. Thank you guys for talking today.
Thank you, Avery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start off with you, Tim. If you find mold in your home or building, a homeowner, for example, you'd probably think to call a professional mold inspector, but a dog can do it too, come to find out, which is a concept many people might not be so familiar with. Can you give us a little bit of background on this, or just, put it simply, what does the dog that you work with, Zuko, do?
Yeah, most certainly. Thank you. Again, thanks for having us. So our dog Zuko and our dog RJ are trained to detect toxic mold. So similar, our dogs train similar in the way that you train explosive and narcotic dogs, but our dog is imprinted on mold. So we go into homes and businesses and we search for mold on a daily basis.
Brett and Brad, since you guys are both the mold professionals here as well, in a more traditional sense, when you first heard about canine mold inspections, what did you think? What was your initial reaction, or what particularly stood out to you both?
I thought them damn dogs are gonna take our job. No, I didn't think that. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Drug dogs are really effective. Bomb dogs are incredibly effective. Dogs have a sense of smell that's thousands and thousands of times better than humans. So I thought that it could maybe be a valuable tool. And then when Tim reached out, it was my first time connecting with someone that actually did canine mold inspections.
And what about you, Brad?
For me, I've heard of canine mold inspections for years. It's something I kind of discarded to the side just because I would see websites for it. And then when Brett said, hey, I connected with this guy that had a mold dog, I never actually knew about it. So I was open-minded. I wanted to see more about it. And that was my initial reaction. What is this all about? What do they even do? Because I always cast it to the side just because, that's not what I do. So.
And when did you guys both meet, Tim? Or when did you guys all connect initially?
About a year, right?
Yeah, probably about a year, maybe a little bit more ago, Tim called Full Spectrum and Tim was looking for mold. And so I told Tim I don't have mold. But then the conversation, I told him maybe I could get you some mold. And so that's where it started. I think Tim was calling around to different environmental people, trying to figure out who to connect with and where he could get some mold.
And when you say get some mold, you mean, mold for Zuko, the dog, to train on?
Yes, correct. Get some mold for Zuko to train, some live mold, which I know later we'll go into of what live mold is and what live mold isn't. But yeah, so get some actual mold on drywall or on wood or something like that from us.
Let's get into how a canine fits into the full investigation. Tim, when the dog alerts to mold, what exactly happens next on your end?
Well, it could be a couple of different scenarios. So when we go into homes to find mold, there's kind of two types, might be the wrong word, but two areas of mold that Zuko is able to find. And so, of course, our main focus is going to be the toxic molds that are going to be living behind walls and perhaps under your flooring, which sometimes can be challenging for traditional methods to detect if there's no moisture. So we definitely want to focus on that. We focus on that in our training and our search patterns. But I also think, given the fact that we deal with a large amount of they're very sensitive to mold. So we find surface mold. And so we find a lot of mold that's very common, that's especially here in Florida, it's going to come back, but it's stuff that you could clean. And if you put on a schedule, you can stay on top of. So we're going to find mold in perhaps your washing machine, your toilet tanks, dish machines. and things like that, where traditional methods aren't going to be focusing. They just can't, that's not why they're there. And so, so I think we bring a little extra in that regards. And so after the dog goes through the home and searches the home and we mark off the areas, we go over the clients with next steps. And so if the dog alerts in areas to where we can't actually know exactly what the source is, perhaps it's a wall he's pointing to, or perhaps he's scratching at the floor, and these alerts are in multiple areas of the home, we are definitely going to recommend a full assessment done by a licensed mold assessor to further evaluate, to further test Zuko's areas, and to come up with the proper protocols for remediation to take place. And so potentially there could be Zuko going in, and then the mold assessor would go in to finalize all those findings before it goes to the remediation team. I think the other process could be if Zuko's alerts are isolated. Let's just say Zuko only is alerting on the HVAC handler and he's alerting on a lot of the airflow through the vents in the homes. Then we wouldn't recommend a mold assessment perhaps to come in. Maybe then we'd go straight to a licensed HVAC remediation company who'd be able to do proper cleaning. But then beforehand, they'd also do a proper assessment of that too, and then give the different areas that could be cleaning. Even though he's maybe picking up on stuff through the rooms, would be associated through the ductwork, but those ductworks could be clean, but it actually could be just pulling from the handler room itself or from the plenum or different areas from the HVAC system. And so it's always good to have a professional put his eyes on things after Zuko. So those are the two kind of different scenarios. Each home is different, and we recommend different protocol to move forward with.
So Brett, let's say Tim calls you because the canine detection isn't so isolated. What do you do after that? What does your side of the investigation look like after a dog has already, alerted at something? What do you do next as the inspector or the remediation expert?
If it's not just isolated to one area and we weren't just going to go directly to remediation, which sometimes we do, like Tim was saying, the full inspection would include moisture mapping, specifically testing the areas where Zuko pointed, whether that was a wall or behind a baseboard or something like that. So we'll do a cavity sample. We'll take air samples. We'll open up the air handlers. We'll look inside the duct system. And essentially what we're trying to do is corroborate those results, those pointings from when Zuko was out there to with what we find with direct microscopic analysis of air samples or surface samples, and then really try to piece the story together too. Tim does this already. Tim will collect information like, were there previous leaks? What's the building history? And then based on what we find, is it still wet? Is it not still wet? Do the air samples back up what Zuko's saying? And then from there, we'll put a protocol together. If work needs to be done based on Zuko's and ours finding, then the protocol will detail that scope of work.
So you kind of try to piece together the story, also further validate the findings with your infrared, your moisture meters, or air samples. Do you guys ever collaborate together on projects, sort of go into the building together or the house together?
Yeah, we do. We actually we recommend that a lot. That's part of our full service package that we offer. And I just think it brings incredible value to have Brett on site with us to do an inspection, just immediately looking over the area. And then if we need to bring the dog in a different way, change, perhaps turning off the airflow, changing the environment of the house. And he's right there on site with us. And I just feel of the ones that we've done, I feel as that the client's in very good hands, even if we don't do a joint one. But I just think it's just an extra level of care that we could bring to the client when we do them together.
The full-blown inspection, you bring in the dog, you bring in the tools, you have everything you possibly can to find this mold.
Yeah. And we're two different entities too. I like working with Brett and Brad because of their integrity and because of their knowledge. And so when we go into homes, I feel confident that Brett's going to say, no, there's not an issue here, even if my dog alerts, if there's not an issue. And I'll take his, 20 years experience doing this and the testing results, so it's good to have good people working with you. That's for sure.
What would you say are some of the strengths and weaknesses of this kind of canine mold detection? Is there times where it's especially useful or situations where maybe it's not so useful and it falls short?
I think probably the number one tool of the dog and how it relates in inspections overall would be the dog's ability to pick up dry mold in walls, behind walls that you can't see. And so sometimes you can't see and won't have any moisture. So it's sometimes challenging for inspectors to go in, and if this wall, they're going to this wall, it's beautiful, they're checking the moisture, there's no moisture reader, there's no moisture in the wall. But potentially this leak could have happened years ago and the mold happened and it dried out, but there's still, the mold went dormant. And so the dog's still able to detect that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest values that the dog brings to it.
When you say that the mold goes dormant, is it possible that, if moisture comes back in, that sort of re-triggers the mold, comes alive again?
My understanding, Brett and Brad know a little bit more about this than me, but absolutely. I think there's, once the mold is dormant and if given the right conditions, right, humidity comes back, then that mold can become active again. So yes, it doesn't really ever die necessarily.
So it is really useful if the dog can alert to, dormant or dry mold, whereas I guess other tools can't necessarily do that.
I think that it's challenging. I wouldn't say that they can't do it. I think it's challenging. The dog is not the end all. So we definitely need experienced people looking. I think there's the challenges with the thermal is that there's other things behind the wall. There could be water pipes, there could be insulation, there could be other things that are attributing to what they're seeing. And then the other part is, again, like I said, the fact that if a wall doesn't come back with any moisture.
Brett or Brad, do you have something to add to that? Maybe a situation where your tools validated something that the dog picked up?
Well, what I'll tell you is, I'll give you an instance where Zuko did better than my tools can do. Because we were at a house, all of us, we were doing an inspection. We were watching Zuko. It was actually the first time that I saw Zuko live. It was at a home, and he was smelling something along this wall. Now, me having a moisture meter, put a moisture meter up to it. There was no kind of water intrusion. Some of the floor tiles were hollow. It was tile floor. They were hollow in front of the wall, but we didn't pick up any kind of moisture. Me as an inspector, I would have probably said, hey, there may have been water intrusion at some point in time. I cannot tell you what's going on inside that wall cavity, but maybe I would have took a wall cavity sample in that area. There was minimal amount of pulling away of the floor, and some of the floor tiles being hollow could also indicate bad installation as well. So there was no clear cut that there is any kind of mold behind the wall, whereas Zuko came in and he was able to indicate that that wall may be an issue. And what we realized there is there was air from the attic space being pushed down through the wall cavity space. And that's not something that I personally would have been able to, if I really, really digged in and, I could have figured it out, but I wouldn't have been able to have been tipped off without Zuko on that. So smell, I mean, with dormant stuff, that's where Zuko really shines, in my opinion, compared to what I do, just because I can't smell behind a wall. Zuko can.
If I can interject with that, is that so Zuko was able to detect that odor coming out of the wall because of the positive air, but it was Brett and Brad who was able to find the mold. They got up in the attic and they were able to determine, she had issues. She had issues up in her trunk system and her HVAC. They put smoke machines up and they realized that she had positive air coming out of the walls. And so with their help, we were able to fix those issues.
But it was initially Zuko that completely changed the direction of the inspection.
And he is a rock star. Let's think he is a rock star.
Zuko's the one that tipped it off. That's what I'm saying is I probably wouldn't. It's probably not something I would have digged in deeper to, because I wouldn't have been alerted to it, if that makes sense. I wouldn't have been ignorant to it. It's just it was a random wall. It was a random wall that showed very little signs of anything.
What about the limitations of canine mold detection?
Well, I think the obvious one is that I can't have a conversation with Zuko, unfortunately. But apart, I think there's a few. I would say that one is that we don't know the levels of it, so we're always going to need testing to find out the amount of issue that a client has. I would say as far as searching, we're finding that so many these new homes that we're searching, there's a lot of attic issues, and these homes are being built so tight. And so attics are someplace that unfortunately that my dog just can't go to for safety reasons. And so there is a potential that the dog can miss mold in the attics. But if the mold makes its way, if we have a water leak from a roof that makes its way down to the ceiling line to where the insulation is, and we get some microbial growth there, I know that my dog can indicate on that without a problem. But if there's mold on top of a roof line that comes in, and you got to imagine if the dog's searching on the second floor and this 10 feet high ceilings, and then there's another 10 feet above that in the attic space, that's going to get missed. And so it's important, again, I go back to, it's important to have professionals that go up in the attic. And I'm surprised that getting into this business to find that, a high majority of assessors don't go up in the attic to do inspections. And I know Full Spectrum does, but I'm just shocked with that. So I would say that, that is one limitation, is the attic space. And we always talk about, the dog doesn't go in the attic. And if clients have handlers, their HVAC units in the attic, I will go up in the attic to assess that, just to get my eyes on that, because that's going to help me in my search. But so, yeah, I would say those are the limitations. I think, I'm a little frustrated with reading other mold dogs. I was just reading a post, will remain nameless, but the post read, if our dogs missed it, it doesn't exist. And unfortunately, that's just not true. And so just like I think even a veteran seasoned assessor will say there's a chance that they can miss mold on an inspection. And so to think that a dog who's not going in the attic is never going to miss mold is not true. But I just go back to thinking that the dog is a viable tool in the process of mold inspections.
Nothing's perfect. Tools and dogs as well. Maybe this is a silly question, but why can't the dog go up in the attic? For safety reasons. What are the safety reasons?
Well, a lot of attics aren't really built out. And so there's just the dog literally step on drywall and he'd go through the ceilings. So we would,
Okay.
we would do that. And then like myself, I was in the attic the other day, and the decking for roofs, they have to penetrate the decking. And so I stabbed myself with a nail. So there's just some risks. Zuko is a very high drive dog, and we want that when he works, and we need that for him to be able to have that energy to search 5,000 square feet home. And so we just wouldn't be able to keep him just really, really calm and have him walk tightrope walk in attics.
And that's another particularly useful situation as well with the dog, is if it's a really huge building, he can of course search very quickly compared to a traditional inspection.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something just on the tip of the iceberg, I think, in regards to mold dogs in the commercial space. But I do see there's some value there in searching large buildings for potentially hidden toxic mold behind walls.
Now, Avery, I don't know if you know this, but Zuko, he takes Tim for a little walk during these inspections as well. So on big commercial buildings, quite a workout.
Yeah.
This question is for whoever wants to answer. Do you see the mold canine industry growing? And what is your projection for how this field will evolve?
You guys want me to take it? All right.
Yep.
So yes, I most certainly do. There's been no indication that it's going to stop growing. I think, it's something that's been on, for almost over 30 years, and started in Europe, but here in the States, probably close to 30 years here in the States. And it has stayed a niche thing for quite some time. I do feel though in the last 5 years that it's definitely gained some traction, and there's definitely a lot more dogs out there, and we love to see that. And so I do think that it's going to be growing, and we just hope that we can continue and even more so be a viable tool, gain healthier homes.
And what about Brett and Brad? Do you see yourselves continuing to kind of grow together with the canine industry?
Be careful how that you guys got to answer yes.
I was really hoping that the next evolution of the AIs, maybe I can become a mold canine dog. I think if we could become mold canine dogs, we could. No, I think the industry is growing, and I think it's going to grow I think it'll hit a saturation point in terms of how many dogs can be there. You know, just like assessors, there's kind of a tipping point. Well, and that's why we work with Paws on Mold, because I truly feel like, Tim gets better daily, just like we do. Zuko gets better daily, just like we do. I see Paws on Mold being a leader, not just in Florida, but, possibly maybe other states. Being veteran, partially veteran owned, and as they're expanding to Tampa, and maybe we'll expand to Tampa in the future. I see the industry of mold in general growing. I just would like to see some sort of framework for the mold canines, because I think anyone could go grab their dog and slap on a work vest and say it's a mold dog and start charging. And there's really nothing, like Brad and I have to go and get accredited from something, and not just accredited. We have to have continuing education credits and take tests and stuff like that. So it would be great to see something like that happen as the mold industry grows, to kind of prevent shysters from coming in and just calling themselves whatever they want. But I think
You want the dog to take an exam?
I do. I do.
We do too.
Well, we're waiting for the Neuralink. Whenever the Neuralink comes out, there'll be the mold canine like dog download, and there'll be a test and stuff. I think I don't know the numbers, but I think it's going to probably double and triple volume wise in the next like few years, mold canines. So for the amount of inspections, the amount of people that know about them, Brad, what do you think?
I mean, for me, I'm speaking strictly from a business standpoint, right? I've been in the mold industry for years. I've seen evolutions of things. Like I said, I've heard of canine dogs years ago. Going back probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was thinking that, hey, I'm gonna have a lot more competition here with home inspectors, because in Florida they made it very easy to get a mold assessor license now when you're a home inspector. When I first became a mold inspector, you had to have either a 4-year microbiology degree or a certain amount of experience, or it was very stringent for years, and that kept me from a business standpoint pretty comfortable. And then the home inspectors came. That opened the door for a lot of bad mold inspections, right? Now that the canine industry is growing, that's another industry that's competition for me in a sense. Like I know Tim, and we've teamed up with him on multiple occasions, but for me as an assessor, that's a competition. It's going to lead to basically the same thing with home inspectors. You're going to, and Brett, I'm basically just echoing what Brett just said. You're going to have a lot of people that are just throwing on a vest on a dog, and saying this is a mold dog. So, and then in a couple of years, I'm probably going to have to compete with some kind of AI, right? So the mold industry is always evolving. It's always evolving. There's always going to be new evolutions of it. So to me, it's just adapting. I think that doing an inspection with Tim and Zuko, with me there or Brett there, we're a completely lethal combination, because they're two different kinds of inspections. So yeah, it's just evolving. It's just like anything else. It's an evolving industry. Competition is going to grow, but if you're good at your job, it will weed out some people.
Just to further reiterate what Brad and Brett says, we couldn't agree more in regards to that. We feel there needs to be some guidelines and regulations involved in the mold dog industry, not only for the dog, but for the handler as well. It almost seems somewhat like the Wild Wild West lately, and there are a lot more dogs coming up that I'm looking at the trainers, and I see one dog that was just trained by a bear trainer. So like there needs
A bear trainer?
yeah, so it's a completely different beast, a completely different animal, no pun intended, but in order to achieve that, but it's really nothing similar at all. So at any rate, I believe that there needs to be some guidelines and things in place. I think there needs to be some ethical guidelines in there as well, involved with this. And the dogs, you can't just expect to buy a dog if you have never been a handler, never been around detection work, is to just buy the dog and then go to another state with your dog, and all of a sudden your dog, you're not going back to the trainer for proofing, you're not continually training every day. And so I worry that the industry might get a bad name if these dogs aren't proofed and trained properly with the right protocols and guidelines in place. So I'm glad that these guys pointed that out because we couldn't agree more.
And do you feel that's really happening where people are just, buying a dog and doing their best to create this business model, or
No,
is
Avery,
that just a fear?
no, it's a reality. Unfortunately, Avery, I was on an inspection. There was a assessor here in the state of Florida who joined me on that inspection, who I just felt that he had asked me an incredible amount of questions about the dog. But I could tell that he didn't know anything about dogs, but he was very interested in the dog and training, and he kept asking me questions about that. Well, it wasn't 2 months later where I see him advertising that he has a dog and he's working a dog. So first off, I know that he didn't have a dog before. It takes definitely longer than 2 months, and certainly longer than 2 months before you should be charging your clients. And so this person has a remediation company. And so he goes in, and if the dog alerts, now he can essentially, potentially sell the client on something they don't need as far as remediation. And so I worry about that. And, Brett and Brad have probably been dealing with this without the dogs in the industry, with people that don't work ethically, but it happens in the canine industry as well. And not only in mold, but in all the lines of detection work. So I think standards are important.
If I can step back a little bit from this, if we can go out one order of magnitude, and I believe that the market self-regulates to a degree. And that's kind of what will happen, is that over time, the scoundrels will get weeded out because we have Google reviews, we have Yelp, we have Better Business Bureau. The market has created self-regulation through private industries, different checks and balances. But I do hope that someone, I don't know who that someone will be, because there is the Association of Working Dogs, right, Tim? Is that what it is? The AWDA or something?
Yeah, there is
Tell us about that.
Sure. So there is one group who has started to certify mold dogs, and so they certify. They're based out of Las Vegas area, and they certify detection teams. They focus mostly on explosive detection and narcotic detection teams, and they certify these dogs. And so they've recently started a program, which is great. We love that they are starting a mold certification program. The reason why we are not participating in this is because the dogs are being certified. It's my understanding that the dogs are being certified on Scent Logic, and Scent Logic is the synthetic molds that is a lot of mold dogs use to train with. We used to use that early on with Zuko. It does help with imprinting. But long story short, the dog is never going to find Scent Logic in a home. None of the other disciplines certify on the synthetic version of those trainings. So there's synthetic versions of narcotics and like fentanyl and such. No certification is done on a synthetic product. So we're not there yet, is what we're getting at. We're not there yet, but at least we got people that are trying, got some people that are trying to get it done. But until certification happens, not only that it's just dog people, I think one thing that falls short, I think, is that it needs to be a collaboration, not only with the dog world industry, which most certifications seem to be. It's my opinion that the certification needs to be a little more all-encompassing of the industry, with assessors, remediators, and potential engineers, and then we get kind of a scope and guidelines that we can all work by and work under. But I think it definitely needs a collaboration and not just canine professionals.
What do you think, Brad? What do you think with the industry? Will the industry self-regulate, or will there need to be some sort of regulations? And how, if the state's not going to probably step in, state and insurance, we're probably a long way away. But if we were to create a private, if there was something, private regulation or another standard, like a book, we have the IICRC S520.
Right.
It's not accepted. It's not it's not something governmental. It's not some state, but it's standard.
Right, but whose responsibility do you think it will have to fall on to come up with these certifications or these guidelines?
A board, but it would have to be like IICRC S520. I think there's 60 or 70 companies that co-authored it that are in the industry that do carpet cleaning and biohazard and mold and mitigation work. And they all cited it, reviewed it, read it. I don't think it needs to be that many companies for mold, but for the mold dog, what do you think, Brad? Like if something were to be created?
I mean, I think that it's great in theory. I think as of right now, what it seems like to me, and maybe Tim could comment on this more, is this feels like almost the wild, wild west when it comes to that industry. And someone ambitious is probably going to step forward and try and do that. They're going to try and become the board of it. There may be multiple people coming forward to try and become the board of it. You need a collective agreement among peers that this is what they're using, and that's kind of what the IICRC did. They brought in 60, 70 companies.
Yeah.
So realistically, it would have to be a collaboration of a bunch of different people within the mold dog industry to come up with something. And I think there's unfortunately probably going to be a lot of muscle measuring during that
a lot of infighting.
Yeah, a lot of infighting to lead to that point. Do I think that it can? I do. It's just I don't think I can't see it anytime soon. I couldn't see that the state or government is going to step in at all. That not to get political, but just the administration that's in there now kind of deregulated a lot of this stuff, and that's when I was talking about with the home inspectors.
Yeah. There's definitely not gonna be more regulation.
Yeah, there's not gonna be more regulation.
Administration.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd have to be private. It'd have to be industry.
Exactly. So I can't see that happening. And insurance companies, I don't think they're anywhere close to looking at dogs as a way to say if there's mold or not. They're looking to say that mold doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's where I couldn't see insurance companies taking a dog's word for it. So yeah, I think it's just going to have to be a group, a large, not like Brett said, not 60 or 70, but it's going to be a semi-large group of people within the industry to come together, which certainly can happen. It's just no time soon.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to kind of pause our conversation. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all three of you for sharing your perspectives. It's always valuable to learn about these more specialized parts of the industry.
Thank you, Avery.
Thank you for hosting us.
Sure. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.